From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Burke, and in every Blue Sky episode, we'll be speaking to leaders, researchers, and thinkers whose stories and insights will remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. As past listeners of Blue Sky and followers of the Optimism Institute know, I think we have a lot to look forward to as a society, and there is no field experiencing more inspiring technological progress than healthcare. And my guest today finds himself right in the thick of it. Tim Fitzpatrick is the co-founder and CEO of IKONA, a company using virtual reality and analytics to improve outcomes for patients treating kidney disease and failure with dialysis. Tim's interest in healthcare has its roots in personal experience, having been a long-term hospital inpatient while recovering from injuries he suffered while serving in the U.S. Navy. Following his time in the service, Tim was an equities trader in New York, covering emerging technologies and new media. In 2017, he helped launch IKONA, a company that addresses challenges in patient education, drawing on research by Tim's co-founders. The company collaborates with major partners like the National Science Foundation, Department of Defense, Startup Health, and NVIDIA. Tim has led research teams as a principal investigator, published several papers on learning and immersive technologies in nephrology, and guided healthcare technology startups as venture partner at FundRx. He also writes Signals, a newsletter about kidney care's future, read by over 10,000 industry, investor, and academic leaders across the globe. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Tim Fitzpatrick as much as I did. Tim Fitzpatrick, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Bill, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Can't wait to chat.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled you're taking the time. We are going to talk more about your current work, but I wanted to start by understanding your background and what it was in your own personal experience with healthcare that made you want to pursue a career in that field.
Absolutely. It's well, how much time do you have? I spent quite a bit of time in the healthcare system, and still a patient to this day. But it traces back to my time in the service. So I spent 7 years in the U.S. Navy. 4 of those years were in the ROTC program up at Boston University in Boston. And I ended up going into a training specialty in aviation. So first injury, I was trying to go special warfare, ended up getting hurt, had a couple shoulder injuries, ended up redesignating or going to a different training pipeline, went through aviation, was about a year and a half into school, entering the advanced training pipeline for fixed wing, when I needed what I was told was a very simple outpatient procedure on my lower back. And, without getting into too much detail, it was, again, it's supposed to be a very simple operation. Well, turns out I spent the next 18 months to 2 years in the hospital. So about three back surgeries. Each of those surgeries was separated by 6 months of recovery, daily wound care treatments, 18 months of something called a wound vac that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies, and just a trying formative crucible of isolation, pain, you name it. A lot of things that are tough anyways to go through from a healthcare standpoint, but even more so when it's kind of on the tail end of spending a childhood or formative years in schooling and all that training that went into getting there in the first place. So I know the health system well, and that became kind of what propelled me into doing what I do today as a founder and what we're building, but then also giving me the staying power to keep at it, which is always important in the founder seat.
So what ages were you when you were hospitalized? How old would you have been?
Yeah, so at the time, this is 2013. So I was, let's say 23, 24 years old.
Wow. And what about that experience? Was it a sense of empathy that you developed for people in that sort of situation? Was it things you saw in your care that weren't so great, or things you saw in your care that were great that you wanted to be a part of? How would you describe that?
Yeah, this is something that anyone who's been a patient for a long period of time or has had a particularly traumatic short stint or chronic long-term stint, I think thinks about frequently. And obviously, I'm tied to it day in and day out now, but I also still think about this frequently, and I know for sure that the empathy piece was forced kind of upon me to be aware of. Number one, because I was receiving the care from peers, corpsmen, surgeons, the reservists, but also active duty, and seeing them every day again for years. So it became kind of routine, and my daily morning trudges through the ER to the wound care specialist and seeing them, and they could kind of gauge how I was doing. So that daily interaction, I think, in building that relationship allowed me to be a better judge of how I was doing, so I could see it in their faces. And I've kind of talked about this, written about this, but I think about this pretty often. But having that barometer of, okay, they're concerned, and should I be concerned?
Right.
Am I going to need another surgery? None of the second and third surgery I had no idea that I was going to need them. So each time was kind of a gut punch. So the empathy absolutely was one of the more instructive and kind of core truths that I internalized. And then, beyond that, just seeing the gaps in care and thinking back on, well, what could have been done differently. But I think, frankly, that took years to crystallize. And I had another career in between the Navy and entrepreneur life where I think that came full circle, and I really saw what that opportunity looked like.
So let's talk about that midpoint. So you were an analyst at a bank. Is that what you were doing?
I was a trader.
Trader.
So I was
straight from the Navy. So once you were well, were you no longer able, or did you serve at all after you got out of the hospital? Or did you go right into trading?
I went right in, and kind of it was somewhat necessary. So just to kind of close that, at least for now, I was out of the cockpit for over a year. And at the time, I don't know if this still exists, but when you're medically downed in a certain career warfare specialty for over a year, really you would need to re-enter the training pipeline. And so I couldn't continue in aviation. So, and that really gets back to if you are, and there's a lot more to be said on, for those who are in the military, who are currently med down, who are in that limbo after they know they can no longer continue in the service, but they also can't get out because you have to get fully healed before you can get out. That's a really tough period. There's been some studies and documentaries on that population, and obviously, as you can imagine, it's a very difficult situation to be in.
Sure.
But I knew that I couldn't continue, so I wrote a letter as part of my package, as they call it, to think about what's next. They wanted me to go intelligence. I studied languages, Russian, Arabic, engineering in undergrad. So it kind of, that was an obvious direction to think about. But I actually asked to get out. So I had enough at that point, and they were kind enough. I still owed my 8 to 10 years, and they were kind enough to say, go ahead. So I was able to look for what's next. And it just so happened I had some connections who were able to make introductions in the finance world. I knew nothing. I knew zero. But just, one thing led to another. Very kind team. I immediately resonated with kind of the close, small team environment of trading. The trading team only had 10 of us.
Yep.
And then I was assigned emerging technologies in media path. So I covered all the public companies in the media space and emerging tech.
Okay.
And that's how that kind of came to be.
So why didn't you do that work forever?
Well, I'm sure you can guess, but one important takeaway from finance, I'm fascinated by the job, like the actual trading and the execution and the algorithms, managing P&L, taking a profit and loss, getting in and out of positions, taking risk. I think in a lot of ways, the immediate previous experience I had flying and the instrument scanning and all the skills that you develop when you're in military aviation actually served me perfectly well for trading. And my risk tolerance was, in a place that's not common, I would say, for most traders. So it kind of felt like a game, and it's someone else's money, and I'm sure that this will come back to bite me. But it really didn't feel that pressure. It wasn't a pressure cooker, and I think I did quite well, and I found it fascinating. But one really important takeaway is knowing what drives you. And it was clear to me what wasn't driving me in finance, and it was even clearer to me once I had a hint of what else I could be working on that did kind of strike at that meaningful chord. And what you asked earlier around, was it the empathy? What was it that brought me back? The second I felt that again, it was fundamentally very different. And I knew that was something I needed to have that I was missing. So finance was great. It was fascinating, but it wasn't what actually drove me.
Nothing beats personal experience when it comes to learning about a subject of interest. In Tim Fitzpatrick's case, a grueling long-term recovery from injuries helped him see firsthand some of the best and worst about our healthcare system. And he also came away with a strong sense of empathy for people in similar circumstances. It's interesting to hear Tim's career path, especially to find how one experience built on the next. His time in the Navy helped him understand how to stay calm under pressure, which helped him excel as a trader. His coverage of new media and technology there led him to understand the potential of IKONA, and his appetite for risk, learned at the Navy and developed more in equities trading, helped him decide to co-found an ambitious startup. Getting back to our conversation, we'll talk some more about Tim's company. So you're now the CEO of IKONA Health. How did you find IKONA? How did they find you? What's the story there?
Yes, so IKONA Health is over 7 years in the making now, and it actually had gotten its start, though it wasn't IKONA before then, a few years even prior to that. So I have two co-founders. The co-founders are physicians by training. They met during their neurosurgical residency up at Dartmouth, and a really fascinating backstory. One of them had been a VR, virtual reality filmmaker prior to going to med school. So really cool background. And as you can imagine, one of those people who kind of, I think we're kind of similar. We jump industries and kind of take things with us, and we just find the world fascinating. So there's a lot of cool questions to be asked and things to explore. And they had done this randomized controlled trial that was basically looking at, hey, what if we told a story through the patient's first person perspective and showed that to patients who were about to go through surgery? What would happen? How would a first person perspective immersive story impact their overall anxiety, impact their perioperative, it's called, experience? So basically like before, during, and after the surgery, will having a better preparatory tool impact that at all? And it turned out that it was wildly successful. We were seeing patients who were 30% less stressed and anxious leading into the surgery, which, as you can imagine, helps a ton. If you've ever had surgery, you know that even if you've had that same surgery multiple times, like in my case, it's stressful every time, even if you know what you're getting yourself into. And that's for people who have been through before. So this whole notion of, what if we can show you a day on the life of your future self? How will that impact your overall experience?
So it's not so much here's what's going to happen when you have the surgery. It's here's your future self. This is what you have. This is what you can safely expect on the other side of the surgery. So it's a sort of a motivation to get through what's scary ahead of you.
I think it's a bit of both. So imagine everything except for the operation itself. So when you put on this headset, you are showing up in the parking lot. You are walking through the front door. You're seeing the person that's going to check you in, and then getting into the waiting room. You're meeting the doctor for the first time. You're hearing these really complicated consent forms, and it seems like it might be daunting and overwhelming, but you're literally embodying and having physicians talk to you and go through the motions. You're being wheeled in to the operating room. You're looking up at these bright lights as you go under, and then you're coming back too, and you're in the recovery room. So it's everything except for the surgery. And that is the part that you're awake for. That's the part that people get stressed out about. Like, what am I actually going to experience when I'm there. And that was the basis where we said, well, I saw the prototype. So at the time, introduced through friends of friends from childhood, we start talking about this. I'm, covering virtual reality, augmented reality on Wall Street. I'm looking at the frenzy in the marketplace after the Oculus acquisition by Facebook, and seeing Google and Samsung invest in these products and devices. And you might remember the cardboard daydream with you plug your smartphone into it and see VR. All of that's happening. And I say, wait a second. If I had had this tool when I was going through surgery, obviously it would have helped a ton. And I would have felt much more prepared for the day of. And I would have felt more confident that I was going to be okay longer term. So we decided in early 2017, after working on it together for a few months, that, hey, this was something that the market needed, that healthcare needed, and that I personally was very motivated to pursue.
Fascinating. As you describe that too, I'm thinking about sports. There are a lot of athletes and sports psychologists who will tell you to do something kind of similar before a big race, or if you watch like a downhill skier and they're going through they close their eyes and they go through the turns in their head. So it's sort of your own in your head virtual reality, but with something that's so unknown like a surgery, that added assist would just be tremendous. It's brilliant. But you're doing different things with the technology now. And I imagine too, just in these 7 years, how far the technology's come. So you're probably trying to keep pace with that. But tell us how you've landed in your current work with the use of virtual reality.
Sure. So a few important lessons, and I would say technological advances that have allowed us to be where we are now. And the timing is everything in a business. We were several years too early when we launched. If we were to launch today, we would be several years too late. So I think we survived long enough.
Better early than late.
To have a chance. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you know that all too well. So we launched, and it actually turned out that about 12 months in, 18 months in, hospitals just weren't ready for this. And they weren't ready for, number one, the tech was too innovative. It was too new. Anyone who's listening to this who's done healthcare sales into hospitals knows that bringing an innovative product, especially if today you're selling AI, for example, it's going to take multiple years, and sales cycles just aren't going to allow for it. So we were too early, and it was too new. And the VR device itself, there was a lot more education and awareness that had to be built among potential buyers before we could even enter a sales cycle. So we ended up realizing we got very lucky and had an opportunity to test this exact same approach in a kidney care setting called dialysis that people may or may not be aware of. But this is for patients with kidney failure who typically, the experience today is that 85–90% of patients on dialysis across the country go to one of 7,500, 8,000 outpatient brick and mortar dialysis clinics 3 times a week for about 12, 15 hours a week. So they sit in a chair and the machine helps filter their blood just like their kidneys would, because their kidneys no longer function as well. Well, it turns out that isn't too dissimilar from surgery. And what we're talking about is how might educational experience help them choose a new method of treatment. And in our case, that's home-based dialysis. So there's actually a choice that a lot of patients have to do the dialysis procedure in their own homes. And that's a really exciting innovation that's been around for a while. It is actually more used in other countries, but patients in the US usually just aren't aware of it. And that's a big, scary decision. So you can imagine, if you're the same ideas that made surgery so powerful might apply in kidney care and in dialysis. And it turned out that was true. So we started that work 5.5 years ago, a number of rollouts in over hundreds of clinics, and obviously with COVID, a lot of lessons learned there, but it's a very powerful tool. And we decided ultimately that there were a number of challenges, patient-facing and frontline healthcare staff-facing within kidney care, where it made sense for us to prove out the business case, to prove out the technology in kidney care first, and then think about expanding the platform for use in home care settings beyond that.
You said 7,500 to 8,000 places where you get dialysis. So that's a lot. So there's a lot of patients in this cohort, if you will. And then, yeah, I'm thinking, it's scary enough when you go home. I had to do some, self-injections, very minor, but it's intimidating. It's not what you do. You don't know if you're going to do it right. It could be dangerous. I mean, especially in a dialysis setting. So I imagine part of what you're doing is it's both instructional and a comfort level, I assume, because I'm sure when you're the patient and they say, hey, you could do this at home, part of you's like, oh, great, I don't have to schlep into here, and it's way better to be at home. And I could be with my pets and my family and et cetera. But boy, that's scary. So where in the process does the VR come to play, and what would I see if I've just been told I had this home option? What happens?
It's interesting, Bill, that you mentioned instructional and emotional. Those are the exact two places where VR shines. Now, okay. And so this is a fantastic kind of segue, right? Because thank you.
Lucked into that one.
Yeah, you really did. So the two places, and for a little bit of context on IKONA, our team is, we have one individual, our head of R&D, Dr. Todd Maddox, who really created a formative approach for how we think about matching a learning task that is some lift that our brains have to do, whether it's emotional learning or hands-on behavior motor skill learning, and then figuring out the right learning tool to match that required need based on brain processing, basically neurobiology. And it turns out that those two areas you talked about are the two where VR is perfect, it's best. And otherwise, PDF, conversations, mobile smartphone tools, you don't need VR for everything. And we absolutely don't advocate for that. But the two areas are, one, when a patient finds out that they have kidney failure, or if they are being told about their options in the first place, transplantation is the gold standard. That's where every patient pretty much wants a healthy kidney, right? They don't want to have to go on dialysis.
But there aren't enough, right? There aren't. It's just a huge issue.
That's a whole topic. It's very timely. You might have seen pig kidneys and the transplants happening. And there's a ton we can talk about in that world. But for most patients, the reality is they'll end up on dialysis. So if you're stressed and you just found out your kidneys have failed because you didn't have symptoms while you had kidney disease, and unfortunately, that's the reality for most patients. You have to, all of a sudden, one, you found out your kidneys failed, you feel terrible, and you're being told you got to make a decision about what you want to do. Well, what if we could put a headset on when you're in one of these, either the hospital or in one of these 7,500 clinics, and completely take you away from this environment of all the bells and alarms and 30 other people in the chairs who are all also suffering, really. Let's take you away from that. Let's reduce some of your anxiety, use mindfulness, think about pain management, whatever it takes to get you out of that environment. And then let's put you in a place where you're ready to learn. You're primed for learning. And then tell you a story, introduce you to a patient who's been in your shoes, who has faced some of the same hurdles, was able to overcome those hurdles, and tell you exactly why, if you decide this is a path you want to go down, you're in good hands and you can do this, right? Let's build that motivation. Motivation is always going to be the number one predictor and determinant of will a patient be successful going home. So that's the emotional piece that you talked about. How can we give nurses and the people who are staffed in these clinics better tools, more powerful tools for having those conversations? And so that's where VR really comes in and shines.
As we talk more about IKONA, I want to be clear here that I am no expert in this field, to say the least. And this episode is not meant to be any kind of endorsement for this company. Instead, I'd like to use this business and its CEO to talk about the power of optimism and give examples of some of the many reasons for us to be hopeful about the future of medicine. As I've said before, I believe that not every optimist is an entrepreneur, of course, but every good entrepreneur has to be, by definition, an optimist. I'm also a big believer in the power of people with diverse backgrounds coming together to make things happen or build something new. In this case, you have Tim, who was a Navy pilot turned equities trader, joining a guy who went to med school only after being a virtual reality filmmaker. And when Tim took his knowledge of VR and thought about how these technologies might have helped him as a patient, he knew this could be a big idea. And he took the risk and jumped in. Getting back to our conversation, I wanted Tim to tell us some more about how IKONA's technology works. When I think of VR these days, it's often like funny YouTube videos of someone playing tennis in their living room and they crash into the wall or something. But it's a headset, and I'm assuming you all don't make the headsets. You are sort of programming those, software, video, that sort of thing. And what makes what's in, if I have this right, what makes what's in there better than just watching a YouTube video on a smartphone or a computer?
Absolutely. And that's the number one question we had to answer from day one, because for the standard solution, the standard is either a video or a PDF. So yes, you're correct. We use off-the-shelf hardware, which is why when I mentioned we were too early, this hardware didn't exist. Right now, pound for pound, to be able to get a Quest, as one example, off the shelf at Target or Best Buy or Walmart or Amazon for a couple $100, and you have a computing device that is low latency, you're experiencing a social world that you have full control over creating. Imagine you can create an entire world and then measure someone's interactions with that world. That just opens up things that you can measure that you can't in real life, right? Number one, the second case is instruction that we talked about. If someone's learning how to do dialysis, and in your case, you had self-injections, that's a perfect analog. So imagine that.
Yeah.
But you have to insert a dialysis needle. It's called self-cannulation at home. That's the number one hurdle to getting patients home on home hemodialysis. Well documented.
Sure.
Fear of needles, fear of self-cannulation.
Yeah.
What if we could walk you through that and build that confidence and demystify that, de-risk that for you? And oh, by the way, because it's in VR, we know every single angle as you're practicing. We can literally tell you that you're building competence and you're building the skills necessary to be successful at home. It doesn't exist today, and a lot of patients end up failing at home because they don't have adequate training. Something goes wrong and they have to go back and center. And it's high mortality, high risk. These are bad scenarios and terrible situations that are addressable. And obviously that's what we get excited about tackling.
So like the guy playing tennis in his living room, if I'm a patient learning about this home dialysis, I'm moving my hands and the VR is tracking. And so I'm putting my hand to the place where the injection should go in. And do I have that right?
Part of it is right. In transparency, we just announced an exciting partnership on the cannulation and vascular access fronts. So we have great content partners who are bringing this content to bear. And ultimately, yes, I think it is something along those lines, though there's still some questions around. Apple just released a new headset, the Vision OS, the Vision Pro, and that's pretty cool. Long term, we want a mixed reality version of this, where you have glasses, you're seeing your real arm, you're able to see in real time what's going on, and we're giving you some training. Today, it's probably the version right before that. So you're seeing not only a fake arm, right, a computer graphic generated arm, but you're also seeing the cutout side by side of what's happening inside the vein. So you're manipulating the needle, but seeing the depths and the angles and how it's entering, and you're learning in real time, and we're correcting in real time the feedback mechanism to build motor behavior skill.
Amazing. And it's demystifying all that, because when you do it, you have no idea what does a vein even look like. That's amazing. So it's obvious just from what you're describing why this is a good thing for an individual patient. If we pull way back, it seems to me, from what little I know about healthcare as an industry, if you will, in this country, this also checks a lot of boxes for where we're trying to move with healthcare. So fewer people in hospitals or in dialysis centers, way less expensive for people to be able to treat themselves at home. I would think in some ways too, technology, AI, virtual reality can scare people because they think it's going to take jobs, and there may be some jobs taken by these. But in healthcare, there's a job shortage. There are not enough people to fill the jobs. So to the extent that you can do this at home, that's, filling a need. I assume in more rural areas, it's harder to find dialysis centers. So am I right that you plug into a place that could help it would be endorsed by the greater healthcare community. Forget a specific nephrologist or whatever, but this is a good thing for the trends in terms of where healthcare is headed.
Yes, I think you're spot on is the short answer. I think how we get from here to there is the question. So there's a number of initiatives that have me feeling optimistic. I would say some of that are macro tailwinds like regulatory policy decisions, reimbursement changes where Medicare is now saying we want to see more health at home. There's something very timely that happened last week, an announcement from FDA. They have this pilot project called Home as a Healthcare Hub, where they're building a AR, VR enabled home environment to understand the impacts of shifting a lot of complex facility-based healthcare into the home. So that's happening. We have bills being passed that will allow for more staff-assisted and non-staff assisted training for complex therapies like dialysis in the home setting. I mean, pretty much everyone sees that this is a good thing. They know that we have to invest in this if we are ever going to solve some of these critical shortages. I don't think anyone really believes that we're going to find 3.2 million healthcare workers, the current gap or whatever the predicted gap is by the end of the decade. So we have to come up with better solutions. I think the question becomes, what can we do today? What can realistically be done safely by patients and their care partners, be it loved ones, family members, community health workers, someone in their communities? What can actually be done? What is safe to do? What can deliver health outcomes? What is the acuity level need of those patients? Are we talking hospital level care in the home, or are we talking about specialty care where we exist? So kind of mapping those needs and then seeing which technologies, VR, AR, remote patient monitoring. People might be familiar with kind of the glucose monitoring and some of the things that are kind of happening on your Apple Watch at home. How do we take all that data and make it usable without being overwhelming to either the patients or to the doctors who care for them? And then what does that future look like? And what are the right stakeholder needs maps as we think about healthcare in 5 years or 10 years?
Amazing. So the FDA has got this in their heads. Back to IKONA, who are your customers? Are you selling into nephrologists? Are you selling into healthcare systems, hospitals? Who do you have to convince that this is a good thing? And then I'm assuming if you can do it with dialysis, then you've got a team and a platform to tackle other of these things that you would do at the home. But let's start with who's your customer?
Yeah, today our customer is the large dialysis organizations. So the organizations responsible for delivery of dialysis, which takes place in the outpatient centers we talked about, as well as the home. So they provide care and they train patients, and they have a lot of the relationships that exist with nephrology specialists, kidney doctors across the country. So Fresenius is the global leader in dialysis. They've been a customer of ours for years. We started with very small proof of concepts in small states in the South. We're now in 5 or 6 states with them, kind of growing state by state, thinking about global opportunities as an organization. They are very excited about the potential of AR, VR, both for patient side and staff side training. They just announced another new exciting project for ICU nurse training. So that's who we are today. And then more recently, we've started direct to practice partnerships. So specialty groups. Balboa Nephrology is a large practice with about 40,000 patients in Southern California, from Los Angeles down to the Mexico border and all the way east to Arizona. They're a fantastic partner. We've been working with them. And then, as you might have guessed, the manufacturers who actually make the equipment. So if we think about the people, the large device companies that, household names, if you think about healthcare, maybe, they too are thinking about, well, how can our devices be adapted to be used in the home setting? And we work with them directly to figure out, well, what is your education and training strategy? So when a patient learns about your device, that they are supported from square one and are ready to use this thing. They're ready for safety and troubleshooting scenarios. So as we think about the next year or 2 years at IKONA, we're going to start to open up some of those partnerships in the kidney care side to prove out that home care model and that education and training. should be a critical foundational pillar, whether it's devices or services. And then beyond that, we'll think about who else should we be talking to, who's already in the home, and becoming that education and training insights layer through tools like VR, AR, or even online for that matter.
Once again, I'm no expert here, but this does sound like a remarkable technology. And we'll talk more soon about the many other ways VR can be used to great success in healthcare. People are understandably concerned about ways in which technology can disrupt workforces and potentially eliminate jobs. But Tim points out there is today a huge shortage of healthcare workers, and if anything, these products could help fill gaps in patient care while not eliminating jobs at all. Now to the final segment of my Blue Sky conversation with Tim Fitzpatrick. So I imagine doing this work, you've learned a ton about the healthcare industry, and you've also learned a lot about this technology and VR. And I'm curious to know, you're clearly an enthusiast for this. Are there other parts of healthcare? We've touched a little bit on that, but are there other things you're seeing? I suppose you mingle with folks working in the overall VR space. Can you paint a picture for some of the possibilities? Because again, I think a lot of us, especially when Apple's latest device came out and the videos of people walking into the coffee shop with this thing on their head. And I know people I meet sometimes like, this is ridiculous, or I don't need another thing where I'm walking around, there's stuff in front of me. Can you tell someone like me who can be skeptical about these things why I should be optimistic, and other things that are going on in the overall sort of tech VR space that we should be excited about?
Absolutely. I would be happy to. And honestly, I'm with you in the sense that I'm probably one of the biggest devil's advocates around AR, VR, and continue to be in the consumer case. So I'm not sold that it's the future. I've been disillusioned many times over. I would consider myself late to the game, having started the company after the Oculus acquisition. But I've seen disillusionment from investors, from customers, from people who thought it was a solution to all of our problems back in the 90s with giant shopping mall setups and the Sega Genesis, my first introduction in the 90s.
Yes.
So I've been through it, and I am the last person to say this is the future unless I really mean it.
Yeah.
Where I get excited about it, though, is in very specific cases, especially in healthcare. I'll just highlight a couple. One is pain management. So the idea that you can put a patient who's experiencing acute or chronic pain into an environment that has them practice skills like mindfulness or breathing, or do things that we know are effective when it comes to pain management, to an extent that you may need less opioids or none at all to treat certain things.
Wow.
Obviously, that's near and dear from my own personal experience in VA and a lot of my friends who have been through it. That would be transformative, and I know that there are current projects happening in the Veterans Administration to bring that to the forefront, and plenty of health systems are adopting that, and we're starting to see payers also do some uptake in the pain management space. But just imagine being able to stay home and put on a headset and get some of the same relief that you see from opioids. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Incredible. So what's next for IKONA? Is you still have a lot of open field in nephrology and dialysis, or are there other parts that you start thinking, other parts of healthcare that you start thinking about moving into? What's next for your company?
Yeah. So what's next for IKONA? We see IKONA happening in the next year to year and a half in 3 phases. So right now, what we talked about is the emotional and the instructional learning. And I'd say we're just through the first phase, which we call see it. I think fans of Acquired will remember the Lockheed episode where they talk about the Corona program, the satellite program. They had 4 phases. We have something similar at IKONA in 3 phases. So first is called see it. That's high-level familiarization. Where we are today is really helping patients see what's possible. So if you have a diagnosis in kidney failure, we want you to know what your options are. And this is supported, one, by the content and what we've built and what we've packaged to bring to patients, but 2, it's a massive focus of the government, of Medicare and Medicaid services, of healthcare providers, all the largest care delivery organizations. We want patients to know that they have options, and that doesn't exist today. there is such a under awareness of that piece. The second phase of IKONA is going to move into see it often. So this is more of the training. We want you to have hands-on practice. In your case, with doing kind of the self-injections, we want every patient to have a chance to have unlimited repetitions on the toughest things they'll have to be expected to do to be successful in something like home dialysis. How can we say, send them a headset at home and they can suddenly do 30, 50 repetitions of self-cannulation, where today it takes them months to get a handful of practice reps in a clinic, and it's subpar. And these patients are ending up failing because they don't have the adequate skills. That can't happen. So we want to make it possible to have access to that training no matter where you are on earth, rural, in cities, no matter who your provider is, we want you to have access to that. And then the last phase is called see it coming, which means you're ready for anything, right? We want you to know that safety-wise, troubleshooting-wise, when that thing inevitably does happen, that bad thing that is scary and so often sends a patient to the hospital, we want you to be ready for it. We want you to be able to take care of yourself or your partner or your loved one, and to have practice this repetition the same way we did in aviation, flight simulators. So we are calm, cool, and always sounding cool on the radio. We want you to feel the same way when you're at home. That is the dream. That is obviously the model we're aiming for within dialysis first, but you can imagine that similar plugins for that emotional piece and that instructional piece will fit into other disciplines as well.
Amazing. And while we're on the subject, not necessarily for IKONA, but when you mentioned flight simulators and pilots, I'm assuming too that VR could be or is being used to train surgeons. You could work on cadavers, and you could also, I would assume, do sort of virtual surgery and procedures and get those reps in, like you said, in a safer setting and a more mistake forgiving setting like VR. Is that happening, or will that happen?
That is, when you asked the question around current applications in VR, that's one of the first things I thought of. It is happening, and I think the safety piece you just alluded to is one of the biggest things, both for surgeons and for patients, right? Here's a safe setting. Get as many practice reps as you can. You're not going to hurt anybody. You're only going to get better, and we'll show you just how good you can get by doing this 1,000 times. And what I love about the surgery application, and a few companies have done this very well. They're one of the far and above earliest use cases that gained traction the quickest, and where there's the most excitement, because as you can imagine, there are these low frequency, high risk procedures, right? Anything that falls into that bucket where maybe a new device that comes to market requires 50 cases to become proficient, but a surgeon only sees that case every few months. It's going to take them 20 years to get proficient by that math. What if you can train them in 2 weeks? What if you can tell them not only will you become proficient in 2 weeks, we know exactly how proficient you're going to get, and we're here to give you live feedback in real time by beaming ourselves into the environment with you to give you hands-on coaching. That's a level of training and competency that didn't exist without VR, and is now, if we take the best practices from something like surgical training and now apply it in the patient-facing landscape, where we're suddenly asking patients to do things at home, that's a really exciting recipe. So hopefully, in the best case scenario, that's what IKONA enables. That's what we unlock for patients as they shift home. And obviously, that's part of the vision and one of our inspirations for what we do.
That's amazing, because as I recall, there are a lot of different factors you can look at when you're assessing a physician, particularly surgeons, on outcomes and safety. But I think the biggest predictor is volume and the number of times he or she has done that specific procedure. And if you can get, like you said, those reps or that volume in a safe setting like that, you can really leapfrog, and then everyone can improve their quality, because everyone can get more reps, even if they don't have a lot of patients in front of them. They can do it through that. So this is amazing, Tim. I really enjoy speaking with especially younger folks like yourself, who approach these new technologies with so much optimism and can paint a picture as well as you just did for us, because again, you get to be in the get off my lawn age category of like someone like me. And these new things come along and you can be skeptical, but I think it's evident in everything you're saying that you're one of those people who's got a big vision for the future and embracing these technologies for good.
I appreciate it, Bill. I'm definitely of the mind that I'm a definite optimist, as Peter Thiel defines, and I think the future is much bigger and much more exciting than the past. And we tend to have a plan to do it. And I think the way that I get there is saying yes to everything before 40 and no to everything after 40. I kind of subscribe to that notion. I have a few more years of yeses in me, and I fully intend on using every one of them. So I appreciate it. Always inspired talking to you, and I really appreciate you giving me the chance to do so.
Thank you. I'm glad you said yes to me, and it's been a pleasure speaking with you, Tim Fitzpatrick. Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Pretty exciting to hear about ways in which virtual reality could be applied to healthcare in the future. Helping people with pain management is one I never would have thought of. And medical training is, as we all know, very expensive. And if surgeons are able to develop their skills through the use of VR, this could be a big cost saver, while also getting these physicians to a high level of experience, getting in reps, as Tim says, very quickly. I know I find this all very interesting and very inspiring, and I hope you do too. I also hope you enjoyed this entire conversation with Tim Fitzgerald. Before you go, it would help us out a lot if you'd leave us a rating and/or review. And consider subscribing to the Blue Sky Podcast and following the Optimism Institute on social media to be sure you never miss a future episode. This and all Blue Sky episodes are made possible by the incredible editing and mixing done by the remarkable team at Sound On Studios. You can learn more about their work at soundonstudios.com. All graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute are provided by Crush Graphics. That's Crush with a K. If you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.